divorce her, throw her out before sunset. Alexander Ashcroft's command thundered through the Grand Council chamber, freezing every Mafia don in stunned silence. Only moments earlier, his wife, Abigail Foster, the quiet, plump woman everyone dismissed as unworthy of standing beside the most feared Mafia boss in America, had stepped forward and struck him across the face. Armed capos instinctively raised their rifles. Isabella Monroe smiled with quiet satisfaction, certain the unwanted wife had finally destroyed herself. Abigail never begged for mercy. She calmly slipped off her wedding ring, laid it beside Alexander's hand, and accepted every insult without revealing the reason behind her unforgivable act. 40 minutes later, the lead vehicles of Alexander's convoy vanished beneath a deafening explosion. As flames swallowed twisted steel, a dying bodyguard seized Alexander's sleeve and whispered, "She didn't betray you, boss. She saved you from the man standing at your side." The Ashcroft mansion stood like a fortress above the city, its stone walls guarding an empire built on fear, loyalty, and unimaginable wealth. Every servant, every guard, every executive understood one rule better than any written law. Alexander Ashcroft's word was absolute. Yet there was one person inside those walls who seemed untouched by power. Abigail Foster never demanded respect, never raised her voice, and never reminded anyone that she carried the title of Mrs. Ashcroft. Most people barely acknowledged her existence. To the household staff, she was simply the plump wife. To the senior capos, she was the embarrassing consequence of an arranged marriage forged between two powerful families years earlier. They often whispered that Alexander deserved someone elegant, glamorous, and ruthless, a queen worthy of the Mafia throne, not a gentlewoman who preferred visiting the servants' quarters to attending lavish banquets. Abigail heard every insult. She answered none of them. Instead, every morning before sunrise, she quietly walked through the medical wing, reserved for injured syndicate guards. While the private physicians checked reports and prescribed medication, Abigail sat beside wounded men who had spent years risking their lives for Alexander's empire. She remembered every name, every wife, every child, every birthday. One young guard named Ethan struggled to hide his embarrassment when she entered carrying homemade soup. "You don't have to do this, Mrs. Ashcroft." She smiled gently. "I know. You've already sent money to my family. I know. My daughter, she's starting school next month because of you." Abigail adjusted the blanket covering his injured shoulder. "Then promise me something. What is it? When you're healthy again, come home safely." Ethan lowered his eyes. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not as a soldier, not as an employee, but as someone's father. Across the mansion, expensive crystal chandeliers glittered above endless luxury. Billion-dollar negotiations unfolded inside marble conference rooms, while helicopters landed on private rooftops, carrying politicians and international investors eager to meet Alexander Ashcroft. Yet Abigail spent most afternoons inside the accounting office, quietly, without anyone noticing. The elderly accountant once watched in disbelief as she transferred enormous sums into dozens of anonymous education funds. "Mrs. Ashcroft," she looked up. "Yes? You've paid tuition for 43 children this year." She simply nodded. "They lost their fathers protecting this family. But no one knows you're the donor. They don't need to." The old accountant smiled sadly. "You deserve more appreciation." Abigail folded another document. Kindness loses its meaning if it's performed for applause. Outside the office, two female employees exchanged mocking glances. There she goes again, trying to act like some saint. If she really wanted Alexander's attention, she'd lose weight instead of playing charity. They laughed. Abigail heard every word. She continued walking without slowing down. That evening, the mansion prepared for another grand reception. Luxury cars filled the courtyard, while influential businessmen, mafia leaders, and foreign dignitaries arrived one after another. Alexander entered the ballroom, surrounded by armed bodyguards. His tailored black suit fit him perfectly. His calm expression alone silenced conversations. Power seemed to follow him like a shadow. When Abigail approached to greet him, he offered nothing more than a polite nod before turning his attention toward his advisors. There was no cruelty in the gesture, only distance, a distance that had existed since the day they married. Their union had never been born from love. It had been negotiated across conference tables by two powerful families, seeking stability, influence, and mutual protection. Abigail had accepted that reality long ago. She never expected affection. Only the chance to quietly support the life fate had chosen for her. Later that night, unable to sleep, Abigail wandered through one of the mansion's rarely used administrative corridors while searching for records requested earlier by the Foundation office. As she turned a corner, unfamiliar voices echoed from behind a partially opened archive room door. She stopped instinctively. The shipment schedule changed. It doesn't matter. Alexander's convoy leaves after tomorrow's council meeting. And security? The inside route has already been confirmed. A pause. Then another voice spoke, colder this time. He'll never see it coming. Abigail's heartbeat quickened. She carefully leaned closer. On the desk inside lay several documents marked with the Ashcroft Syndicate seal. Beside them rested a detailed convoy map. Red markings circled a section of highway leading out of the city. One man quietly slid a sealed envelope across the table. When the explosion happens, no witnesses, no mistakes. Abigail instinctively stepped backward. Her heel brushed against an old metal vase. A faint scrape echoed through the silent hallway. Inside the room, every conversation stopped. The archive room door flew open. Abigail instinctively lowered her gaze as two intelligence officers stepped into the corridor. One of them narrowed his eyes. "Mrs. Ashcroft?" She forced a calm smile. "I was looking for last year's Foundation expense reports." The taller officer glanced toward the shelves behind her before giving a dismissive nod. "This wing isn't open to family members after midnight. I apologize." She bowed slightly and walked away without looking back. Only when she reached the opposite corridor did she allow herself to breathe. Her hands were trembling. She had not recognized every voice inside that room, but one sentence echoed relentlessly through her mind. When the explosion happens, someone inside Alexander's own organization was planning to murder him. The following morning, Abigail quietly began searching for answers without alerting anyone. She knew one mistake could expose whoever had unknowingly leaked the information, or worse, reveal the innocent person secretly feeding intelligence from within the conspiracy. If she accused the wrong man, the real mastermind would simply disappear. If she warned Alexander without proof, he would immediately launch an internal purge. Hundreds of loyal men could die before the traitor was ever found. She needed certainty. For 3 days she observed everything: delivery schedules, vehicle assignments, security rotations, meeting locations. Small details most people ignored slowly formed a disturbing pattern. Every confidential convoy route became known to outsiders within hours. Someone close to Alexander controlled the flow of information. Someone trusted. Someone powerful. Meanwhile, preparations were underway for the annual Mafia Council Assembly, where leaders from every major family across the country would gather inside Ashcroft headquarters. Alexander would personally lead the convoy afterward, exactly the route marked on the map she had seen. Abigail barely slept. Dark circles appeared beneath her eyes. Even the household staff noticed. One maid whispered, "She looks terrible." Another laughed softly. Perhaps Boss Ashcroft finally realized marrying her was a mistake. Their conversation stopped as Isabella Munro entered the dining hall with effortless elegance. Every employee straightened immediately. Unlike Abigail's quiet presence, Isabella commanded attention the moment she appeared. She greeted senior executives by name, joked comfortably with capos. Even Alexander allowed brief conversations with her concerning business affairs. From a distance, many believed she looked like the woman who should have been standing beside the Mafia boss. Isabella noticed Abigail eating alone. She approached with a sympathetic smile that never reached her eyes. "You haven't been sleeping." Abigail politely nodded. "A little tired. You should take care of yourself." "I will." Isabella studied her for another moment. "You know," she leaned slightly closer, "sometimes loving someone also means knowing when to step aside." Abigail remained silent. She simply smiled with quiet courtesy. That answer irritated Isabella more than any argument could have. She walked away, convinced Abigail lacked the courage to fight for her marriage. What Isabella never understood was that Abigail had never viewed love as a competition. To her, protecting someone mattered more than possessing them. The morning of the council assembly arrived beneath grey skies. More than 300 armed guards secured the estate. Helicopters circled overhead. Bulletproof vehicles lined the courtyard in perfect formation. Inside the grand chamber, dozens of Mafia dons awaited Alexander's arrival. Richard Vaughan, the syndicate's chief intelligence officer, calmly coordinated every security detail with flawless precision. His expression revealed nothing. Neither did the eyes that briefly met Abigail's across the room. For the first time since overhearing the conspiracy, a chill ran through her entire body. Something about him felt too calm, too prepared. Alexander entered to thunderous applause. Business began immediately. Reports, territories, financial agreements, international expansion. Every decision strengthened the Ashcroft empire. Yet Abigail barely heard a single word. Her attention remained fixed on the convoy schedule, resting beside Richard's documents. The departure time, the exact highway, the bridge marked in red. Every piece matched what she had secretly discovered. Then she noticed something else. A junior communications officer, standing near the rear entrance, discreetly slipped a folded note beneath a ledger before quickly walking away. Richard picked it up without anyone noticing. His eyes scanned the message for less than a second. Then, he smiled. Only slightly, but enough. Enough for Abigail to realize the attack was no longer merely being planned. It had already begun. She looked toward Alexander. He was concluding the meeting. In less than 2 minutes, he would leave the chamber, enter the convoy, and drive directly toward the place where death was waiting. She had no evidence strong enough to convince him, no time to explain, no safe way to expose the conspiracy without condemning the undercover source, whose identity would instantly be uncovered. There was only one action left that could stop Alexander from leaving on schedule. One act so shocking that the entire Mafia world would remember it forever. Abigail slowly stood from her seat. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the quiet woman no one had paid attention to all morning. She took one steady breath and walked directly toward the most feared Mafia boss in America. The chamber fell into complete silence as Abigail stopped only a single step away from Alexander. Dozens of Mafia dons exchanged puzzled glances. No one understood why the quiet woman had interrupted the council meeting. Alexander looked at her with restrained confusion. "Abigail." His voice remained calm. "The meeting is over." She searched his face, desperately hoping he would notice the fear hidden behind her composed expression. He didn't. There was no time. If she whispered another warning, Richard would hear. If she mentioned the assassination, the undercover informant buried inside the conspiracy would be exposed before sunset. Everyone who had secretly risked their lives to feed information to the Ashcroft syndicate. would die. She closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. "Forgive me." Then, slap! The sound echoed through the marble chamber like a gunshot. Alexander's head turned sharply. Every capo instinctively reached for his weapon. Several rifles were raised before Abigail's hand had even fallen back to her side. The impossible had happened. No one had ever laid a hand on Alexander Ashcroft. Not an enemy, not an ally, not even his own family. For several endless seconds, absolute silence consumed the room. Isabella's lips slowly curled into a victorious smile. She had waited years to watch Abigail destroy herself. Richard lowered his gaze, carefully hiding the satisfaction flashing across his face. Alexander stared at his wife. There was no anger at first, only disbelief. Then came humiliation, cold, absolute. "What?" he asked quietly. "Have you just done?" Abigail said nothing. She could already see members of the convoy waiting outside through the enormous glass windows. Drivers had started the engines. The schedule remained unchanged. She needed more time. She took another step forward. "I won't let you leave." The words were soft, almost pleading. Alexander's expression hardened. "You've embarrassed this family before every leader in the country. I know. You've questioned my authority. I know. You owe me an explanation." She looked into his eyes. For one dangerous moment, she nearly told him everything. About the overheard conversation, about the marked highway, about the explosion, about the undercover source who would certainly be executed if she exposed what she knew too soon. But then she saw Richard watching, not watching Alexander, watching her. His expression remained calm. Too calm. He was waiting to see whether she knew enough, whether she would reveal the leak, whether she would unknowingly condemn the one person still hidden inside his network. Abigail swallowed the truth. "I'm sorry." Those two words only deepened Alexander's fury. "You apologize," his voice echoed through the chamber. Without giving a reason, she lowered her head. "Yes." The room erupted with whispers. "She's insane. Has she lost her mind? Execute her." She struck the boss. Several veteran dons shook their heads. No punishment could restore Alexander's authority unless it was immediate. Alexander slowly removed the wedding ring from his finger. The gesture stunned everyone even more than the slap itself. "When we married," he said coldly, "I promised our families I would honor that agreement." He placed the ring upon the council table. "That promise ends today." Abigail's breathing faltered. Not because of the divorce. She had accepted long ago that his heart had never belonged to her. What hurt was knowing he now believed she had betrayed him. Still, she reached for her own ring, carefully slid it from her finger, and placed it beside his. No tears, no pleading, no argument, only quiet acceptance. "If that is your decision," she forced a faint smile, "I accept." Alexander looked away. From this moment forward, Abigail Foster has no place inside the Ashcroft family. The guards stepped aside, not as an act of kindness, but because she was no longer their mistress. She walked alone toward the massive entrance. Hundreds of eyes followed her. Some filled with contempt, others with pity, none with understanding. Outside, rain had begun to fall. She paused briefly at the top of the staircase. Across the courtyard, Alexander's armored convoy prepared to depart exactly on schedule. Her heart pounded. Not yet. Please. One of the lead vehicles suddenly reported a mechanical warning. The convoy commander immediately ordered every vehicle to halt, while technicians inspected the problem. Only 4 minutes. 4 precious minutes. Abigail silently thanked God. She continued walking through the gates without looking back. Inside the command vehicle, Alexander sat in complete silence. His cheek still burned where she had struck him. Humiliation replayed endlessly in his mind. Richard entered the vehicle carrying updated security reports. "Everything is secure now, boss." Alexander nodded without emotion. "Proceed." The convoy rolled forward. Black-armored SUVs stretched across the highway like a moving fortress. Helicopters monitored the skies overhead. Elite motorcycle escorts cleared traffic miles ahead. Everything appeared normal. Until the world exploded. A deafening blast erupted beneath the lead vehicle. Fire engulfed the front of the convoy. The first armored SUV was hurled into the air before crashing onto its side. A second explosion followed almost instantly. Shattered steel rained across the highway. Escort motorcycles spun violently into concrete barriers. Smoke swallowed the road. Gunfire erupted from hidden positions overlooking the bridge. Bodyguards scrambled to shield Alexander as burning wreckage blocked every escape route. Chaos consumed everything. Minutes later, when the attack had finally been repelled, Alexander stumbled from the damaged vehicle. His expensive suit was stained with ash and blood. Around him lay destroyed armored cars and wounded men calling desperately for medics. One veteran bodyguard, mortally wounded by shrapnel, weakly grabbed Alexander's sleeve. His breathing was shallow, his voice barely audible. "Boss," Alexander knelt beside him. "Save your strength." The old guard slowly shook his head. "No." He coughed blood. "Mrs. Ashcroft." His eyes filled with painful regret. "She knew." Alexander froze. "She stopped you." Another labored breath. "Because someone close." His fingers tightened desperately around Alexander's wrist. "Betrayed." The sentence never finished. His hand fell motionless. Alexander remained kneeling in silence as flames reflected in his stunned eyes. For the first time since the slap, he wondered whether the woman he had divorced less than an hour earlier had never betrayed him at all. The burning wreckage illuminated the night sky long after the last gunshot faded. Emergency teams rushed through the shattered convoy, pulling wounded guards from twisted steel, while helicopters circled overhead, searching for fleeing assassins. Alexander stood motionless in the middle of the ruined highway. His empire had survived countless wars, foreign cartels, government raids, rival syndicates. Yet this attack had come from within. Someone he trusted had carefully guided him toward certain death. And one woman had tried to stop him, not with evidence, not with accusations, but by sacrificing her own reputation. The realization struck harder than the explosion itself. "Find Abigail." His voice was quiet. No one moved. Alexander slowly turned toward his surviving commanders. "I said." His eyes burned with restrained fury. "Find my wife." Within minutes, every intelligence division inside the Ashcroft syndicate received the same order. Private satellites were redirected. Traffic cameras were seized. Safe houses were searched. Border crossings were monitored. The entire empire shifted its focus from hunting assassins to finding the woman it had publicly condemned only hours earlier. No one questioned the order. No one dared. Miles away, Abigail sat alone inside a small chapel attached to an old community hospital supported by one of her anonymous charities. She had changed into a plain grey coat, without jewelry, without bodyguards, without the title of Mrs. Ashcroft. To everyone around her, she looked like an ordinary woman praying quietly beneath stained glass windows. Only when she was certain no one could hear did tears finally fall. Not because Alexander had divorced her. She had accepted that possibility the moment she raised her hand. She cried because she knew what would happen next. Alexander would investigate, Richard would panic, and innocent people caught between them would begin disappearing. A gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Abigail." She looked up. A young nurse stood nervously beside her. "The little boy from room 7 has been asking for you." Abigail smiled through her tears. "I'll go." Inside the room lay Noah, the son of a former Ashcroft driver who had died protecting one of Alexander's supply convoys 3 years earlier. Leukemia had stolen the color from his face, yet his eyes brightened immediately. "You came?" "I promised I would." "I heard." He hesitated. "They said you don't live in the big mansion anymore." She gently stroked his hair. "Sometimes people have to leave one home to protect another." The child accepted the answer without understanding it. Children rarely needed explanations to recognize kindness. Meanwhile, inside Ashcroft headquarters, Richard Vaughan calmly directed the internal investigation. Every report reaching Alexander passed through him first. Every witness was interviewed by his department. Every surveillance recording was carefully filtered. His strategy was simple. If Alexander began believing Abigail was innocent, someone else had to become guilty, preferably Abigail herself. An hour later, Richard entered Alexander's private office, carrying a thick investigation file. "We recovered something from one of the destroyed communication vehicles." Alexander looked up. Richard placed several photographs across the desk. The first showed Abigail walking through the administrative corridor 2 nights earlier. The second captured her standing outside the archive room. The third displayed a blurry image of her near-classified convoy schedules. Richard remained silent, allowing the evidence to speak first. Finally, he sighed. "I hoped I would never have to show you these." Alexander studied every photograph. "What are you suggesting?" "Mrs. Foster had access to confidential routes before today's attack." Alexander's expression darkened. Richard continued carefully. "We also found evidence she left the estate without informing security." "Go on." "That alone proves nothing." A deliberate pause. "But combined with today's events..." He slowly slid one final document across the table. It was a bank transfer. Millions of dollars, sent anonymously, to an offshore account. The recipient's name had been erased. It appears someone paid generously for today's information. Alexander stared at the document. Something felt wrong. Richard knew exactly how investigations worked. Too much evidence arriving too quickly usually meant someone wanted investigators to stop asking questions. Who verified these reports? My department. Who collected the photographs? My department. The financial records? My department. Silence settled between them. For the first time in years, Alexander noticed an uncomfortable pattern. Everything pointing toward Abigail had passed through only one pair of hands, Richard's. Across the city, another secret unfolded. Inside an abandoned warehouse, converted into a temporary safe house, a frightened young man nervously waited beside a dim lantern. His name was Daniel Mercer. Officially, he had died 6 months earlier, during a cartel ambush. Unofficially, he remained the Ashcroft Syndicate's deepest undercover informant inside Richard Vaughan's network. Only 2 people knew he was still alive: Abigail and the elderly bodyguard who had died on the highway. Daniel's hands shook as Abigail entered. "I heard about the attack." She nodded. "They'll start looking for you now." "They already are." "I should surrender." "No." She spoke firmly for the first time. "The moment they discover you're alive, Richard will kill every family connected to you." Daniel lowered his head. "I never wanted you to carry this alone." Abigail smiled faintly. "If I had told Alexander the truth in front of everyone, Richard would have realized you were the leak. He would have hunted you before sunset." Daniel's eyes filled with guilt.
You lost everything because of me. No, she gently corrected him. I lost a marriage. She looked toward the rain outside the warehouse. If your testimony survives, thousands of innocent employees survive with it. At that very moment, several black SUVs surrounded the building. Doors opened. Armed men stepped into the shadows. Their movements were disciplined, silent, professional. They were not rival syndicates. They were Ashcroft soldiers. But they were not there under Alexander's orders. Richard had arrived first. Abigail slowly closed her eyes. She had protected the truth for as long as she could. Now, the people she had sacrificed everything to save were about to become the next targets.
Night settled over the abandoned warehouse like a funeral shroud. Rain hammered against the rusted roof, while Daniel Mercer instinctively reached for the pistol hidden beneath the wooden table. Abigail gently stopped him. No, they've found us. I know. We have to run. She slowly shook her head. If we run now, they'll chase us. If they chase us, the witnesses will never escape. Daniel looked toward the rear exit, where 6 frightened families, former accountants, junior logistics officers, and low-ranking employees who had secretly gathered evidence against Richard for months, waited in terrified silence. None of them were soldiers. They were clerks, drivers, receptionists, young analysts, people who had simply refused to help destroy the Ashcroft syndicate from within. Richard intended to erase every one of them. Outside, SUV doors slammed shut one after another. More than 30 armed men surrounded the building. Richard Vaughn stepped from the lead vehicle, calmly adjusting his gloves as though arriving for an ordinary business meeting. He spoke into his radio. No unnecessary casualties. His lips curved into a faint smile. Except Abigail Foster. Inside, Abigail looked at every frightened face. Some of them had once laughed at her appearance. Some had whispered that Alexander deserved a more beautiful wife. One woman suddenly collapsed to her knees. "I'm sorry." Abigail blinked. The young accountant sobbed uncontrollably. "I called you fat." "I mocked you. I told everyone you were pretending to be kind." More voices followed. "We judged you. We believed the rumors. We never thanked you for paying our children's tuition. We thought you wanted attention." Abigail quietly helped the crying woman to her feet. "This isn't the time to carry guilt." She smiled with the same gentle warmth they had ignored for years. "Tonight, we only carry hope." The room fell silent. For the first time, they truly understood who she had always been. The first explosion shattered the warehouse entrance. Concrete dust filled the air. Gunfire erupted immediately afterward. Richard's men stormed inside from 3 directions. Daniel returned fire, while several former guards rushed the civilians toward a hidden service tunnel beneath the warehouse floor. Abigail remained behind. One wounded security officer stumbled after being struck in the shoulder. She pulled him behind overturned machinery before bullets tore through the wall where he had been standing. "You should leave me." "No, they're coming. I know. You'll die." She tore fabric from her coat and wrapped his wound. "Then we'll keep moving." Across the warehouse, children screamed. Smoke spread rapidly. Abigail spotted a teenage girl trapped beneath collapsed shelving. Without hesitation, she sprinted across open ground. Bullets struck metal only inches away. Daniel shouted desperately. "Mrs. Foster." She ignored him. Bracing herself against twisted steel, she pushed with every ounce of strength she possessed. The shelves shifted. Barely enough. The frightened girl crawled free. Before Abigail could stand, a bullet ripped through her side. She staggered, looked down. Blood slowly spread across her coat. Yet she smiled. "Run." The girl burst into tears. "I won't leave you. You must." The surviving witnesses disappeared into the escape tunnel as Daniel forced the final security door shut behind them. Richard watched from outside, through a shattered window. "So," he murmured, "you really were willing to die for strangers." Hundreds of miles away, Alexander's emergency command center exploded into activity. One intelligence officer rushed through the doors. "Boss." Alexander immediately stood. "What happened?" "We intercepted an encrypted transmission." "Location?" The officer pointed to a digital map. "Old Riverside warehouse." Another analyst interrupted. "The signal came from Richard Vaughan's private tactical frequency." Silence. Then Alexander understood. Richard had never been searching for Abigail. He had been hunting her. Alexander's expression became terrifyingly calm. "Cancel the summit in Geneva." Every executive froze. "The international families are already waiting." "I don't care. The treaties," I said. His voice cut through the room like a blade. "Cancel everything." One stunned advisor whispered, "Boss, if you leave now, the entire international alliance could collapse." Alexander picked up his pistol, then let it collapse. He looked every commander directly in the eyes. "An empire can be rebuilt. My wife cannot." Within seconds, helicopters thundered into the night. Armored divisions abandoned checkpoints. Elite strike teams changed course. Across 3 continents, commanders received identical orders. Operation Iron Crown was suspended. Operation Abigail began. For the first time in Ashcroft Syndicate history, every available resource was mobilized to save one woman. Back inside the warehouse, Richard slowly walked through the smoke toward Abigail. She struggled to remain standing, despite the blood soaking her clothes. He looked almost disappointed. "You know, I always underestimated you." She said nothing. "You could have ruled this empire." "I never wanted power." "I know." He smiled coldly. "That's why you were dangerous." Behind Abigail, the final group of witnesses disappeared through the underground tunnel. Richard noticed too late. His smile vanished. "You let them escape." Abigail leaned weakly against a broken pillar. "Yes. You've ruined years of planning." "No," she whispered. "I saved years of loyalty." Richard raised his pistol. "This ends here." Before he could pull the trigger, the warehouse walls shook violently. Rotor blades roared overhead. Searchlights pierced the smoke. Then came a voice, so furious, it seemed capable of stopping hearts. "Richard!" Alexander Ashcroft. He had come himself. The Mafia boss, who had abandoned an international empire for the woman he had once publicly cast aside. Richard fired first. The bullet tore through the darkness. Alexander shoved one of his men aside and returned fire almost instantly. The warehouse erupted into chaos as elite Ashcroft strike teams crashed through shattered windows, ropes dropping from hovering helicopters, while heavily armed operators flooded every entrance. "Protect, Mrs. Ashcroft." The command echoed above the gunfire. For years, those same words had never been spoken. Tonight, every soldier answered them, without hesitation. Richard's mercenaries fought desperately, but they had prepared for an execution, not a full-scale war against the Ashcroft Syndicate's elite. Within minutes, the battle shifted. Smoke swallowed the warehouse. Explosions shook its crumbling foundations. Concrete rained from the ceiling. Alexander ignored every warning shouted behind him. "Boss, it's unstable." He never slowed. His eyes searched through fire and dust until they found only one person: Abigail. She was kneeling beside a wounded young accountant, pressing both hands against the man's bleeding chest. Even after being shot herself, she was still trying to save someone else. Alexander felt something inside him break. He had spent years believing strength meant domination, power, control. Yet the strongest person in the building was the woman everyone had mocked. Another burst of gunfire forced him behind a concrete pillar. Richard retreated deeper into the warehouse with several remaining gunmen. "You still don't understand," Richard shouted. "I built this empire while you sat on your throne." Alexander answered with icy calm. "No, you poisoned it." Several minutes later, Richard reached the control room overlooking the warehouse floor. He activated the emergency demolition system. Warning sirens screamed. Red lights flashed. A computerized voice repeated, "Structural failure imminent. Evacuate immediately." Every remaining mercenary sprinted toward the exits. Richard laughed. "If I can't have this empire, neither can you." He pressed the final detonator. Steel support beams exploded one after another. The entire building groaned. Alexander looked upward. The roof was collapsing. "Everyone out!" Soldiers rushed civilians toward the exits. Abigail suddenly froze. "No!" Alexander followed her gaze. A little girl, the daughter of one of the rescued employees. She had fallen beneath a collapsed steel beam only 20 yards away. Without hesitation, Abigail ran back inside. "Abigail!" Alexander's voice echoed helplessly. She ignored him. The child cried desperately. "I can't move." Abigail dropped beside her, using every remaining ounce of strength to lift the twisted beam. Pain shot through her wounded side. Blood dripped onto the broken concrete. The beam barely lifted. It wasn't enough. Then another pair of hands appeared beside hers. Alexander. Neither of them spoke. Together, they pushed. The steel shifted. Just enough. The little girl crawled free and stumbled into the arms of waiting soldiers. Relief washed across Abigail's face. Then the ceiling collapsed. Alexander threw himself over her. Massive chunks of concrete crashed around them. Dust swallowed everything. Outside, every soldier stared in horror. "Boss." Silence. 1 second. 2. 3. Then a hand emerged from the debris. Alexander, covered in blood and dust. He refused every offered hand. Instead, he dug through the rubble with his bare hands. "Abigail!" Again and again, ignoring shattered fingernails, ignoring bleeding palms, ignoring collapsing debris. Finally, he found her, unconscious, barely breathing. He lifted her into his arms as though she weighed nothing. For the first time anyone could remember, Alexander Ashcroft cried openly. "I'm here." His voice trembled. "I'm here now." She slowly opened her eyes. "You came. I should have come much sooner." A faint smile appeared. "I knew you would." Those simple words shattered what remained of Alexander's pride. Richard attempted to flee through an underground maintenance tunnel. He never made it. Veteran capos blocked every exit. The same men who had once admired him now pointed their weapons without hesitation. Richard laughed bitterly. "So this is loyalty." One elderly capo answered quietly. "No, this is justice." Richard Vaughan was arrested alive. Within hours, every hidden document, every secret account, every assassination order, and every betrayal was uncovered. Isabella Munro's involvement was exposed as well. She had knowingly helped Richard manipulate Alexander's trust, believing she would stand beside the Mafia boss once Abigail disappeared. Instead, she left the Ashcroft estate in handcuffs. Not one person defended her. Several weeks later, representatives from every Mafia family gathered once again inside the Grand Council chamber. This time, no one spoke above a whisper. Alexander entered alone. He wore no ceremonial jacket, no symbols of authority, only a plain black suit. Then, Abigail entered beside him. The scar beneath her shoulder remained hidden beneath a simple white dress. She walked slowly. Not as a queen, not as a conqueror, simply as herself. Alexander stopped before the assembled leaders. For a long moment, the most feared mafia boss in America said nothing. Then, he bowed, a full, respectful bow, to his own wife. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber. Veteran dons stared in disbelief. No Ashcroft leader had ever bowed before anyone. Alexander's voice carried through the silent hall. The strongest person in this empire, he turned toward Abigail, is not the one holding power. It is the one willing to lose everything to protect others. He faced every mafia family. I divorced the only person who never betrayed me. I doubted the one woman who stood between me and death. I mistook sacrifice for betrayal. Then he looked directly into Abigail's eyes. I'm sorry. Not as a mafia boss, not as a ruler, but as a husband. Tears quietly filled Abigail's eyes. She stepped forward, gently took his trembling hand, and smiled. I forgave you. The moment I chose to protect you. Months later, the Foster Hope Foundation opened its doors, providing scholarships, medical care, housing assistance, and financial support to the families of every employee serving the Ashcroft Syndicate. Abigail became its chairwoman. At the grand opening, a journalist asked, "Boss Ashcroft, people still remember the day your wife slapped you in front of the entire mafia world. Do you regret what happened?" Alexander smiled softly. He intertwined his fingers with Abigail's. No. The room became silent. I regret everything that happened after I failed to understand why she did it. Behind them, inside a bulletproof glass display, rested a simple wedding ring. Its inscription read, "She accepted hatred to save the man who believed she had betrayed him." One by one, veteran mafia dons rose to their feet. Business leaders followed. Former rivals applauded. Even Alexander's oldest capos bowed respectfully toward Abigail. Alexander looked at her through tear-filled eyes. That slap saved my life. His voice cracked into a grateful smile, and taught me that real love sometimes looks exactly like betrayal, until the truth finally arrives. Standing beside the man whose empire stretched across continents, Abigail never sought power, applause, or revenge. She simply continued doing what she had always done, protecting others with quiet compassion, even those who had once mocked her. In the end, the Ashcroft Syndicate learned a lesson no weapon could teach. The strongest shield in the mafia world is not forged from steel or bullets, but from a heart willing to break so someone else can live.